I never thought I'd be the guy to tell a story like this. My name is Mike, and my wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 7 years. We live in a cozy suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. You know the type. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and the constant hum of lawnmowers on the weekends. We have a quaint 2-story house with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Max. From the outside, our life seemed perfect. Sarah was a stunning woman. She had long blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could light up any room. She worked as a marketing executive at a big firm downtown, and I was a software developer at a tech company. We didn't have kids, which allowed us plenty of time for each other. Our weekends were filled with date nights, barbecues with friends, and spontaneous road trips. Life was good. At least, that's what I thought. Little did I know, the facade of our perfect marriage was about to crumble in the most unexpected and painful way. It all started subtly, like the first cracks in a dam. I began to notice small changes in Sarah's behavior. At first, I brushed them off as stress from work. But as time went on, the signs became harder to ignore. The woman I once knew seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone I could hardly recognize. In hindsight, I suppose the signs were always there. Maybe I was too blinded by love to see them, or maybe I just didn't want to admit the possibility that Sarah could betray me. But when the truth finally came to light, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And let me tell you, the journey to that revelation was anything but straightforward. This is the story of how I discovered my wife's infidelity, the emotional roller coaster that followed, and the actions I took in response. It's a tale of heartbreak, anger, and ultimately, a search for redemption in the aftermath of betrayal. Looking back, the first red flag appeared about 6 months ago. Sarah started working late more frequently. At first, it seemed reasonable. She was up for a big promotion, and putting in extra hours made sense. But then, it became excessive. Nights turned into weekends, and she always had an excuse ready: an urgent project, a last-minute meeting, or an impromptu business trip. One Friday night, she came home well past midnight, reeking of alcohol and perfume that wasn't hers. I asked her about it, and she laughed it off, saying the team had gone out for drinks to celebrate closing a major deal. Her story seemed plausible, but something felt off. Sarah was never one to mix business with pleasure, and the way she avoided eye contact made my gut churn with unease. Then there were the phone calls. She started getting more calls at odd hours, always stepping out of the room to take them. When I asked who it was, she'd say it was just work. But the way she guarded her phone, clutching it like a lifeline, told me there was more to it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs to get some water and heard her hushed voice from the living room. She was talking to someone on the phone, her tone soft and intimate. As soon as she noticed me, she quickly ended the call, saying it was her colleague, Lisa, and they were discussing a presentation. It didn't make sense. Who discusses work presentations at 2 a.m? Sarah's behavior continued to change. She became distant, almost cold. Our conversations felt forced, and our physical intimacy dwindled to almost nothing. She'd pull away from my touch, claiming she was too tired or stressed. I tried to be understanding, but the more she withdrew, the more I felt like a stranger in my own home. One evening, I found myself alone again, nursing a beer on the porch. Max sat by my side, sensing my distress. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I confided in my best friend Tom during one of our regular weekend barbecues. Tom was a straight shooter, never one to mince words. "Mike, man, you need to get to the bottom of this," he said, flipping burgers on the grill. "If she's hiding something, you deserve to know." His words echoed in my mind for days. I decided to pay closer attention to Sarah's actions. I started noting down the days she worked late, the calls she took, and any peculiar behavior. It wasn't long before I noticed a pattern. There were specific dates and times she'd vanish without a plausible explanation. The final straw came when I found a receipt for a fancy restaurant tucked in her purse. It was dated on a night she claimed to be working late at the office. My heart pounded as I stared at it, a cold realization dawning on me. Sarah was lying, and I needed to know why. The next step was clear. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So I decided to dig deeper, hoping I was wrong but fearing I was right. What I uncovered would change my life forever. I couldn't shake off the growing suspicion gnawing at my gut, so I took a drastic step. I installed a small GPS tracker in Sarah's car, hidden under the driver's seat. It felt wrong, like a breach of trust, but I had to know the truth. I also installed a keylogger on our home computer to monitor her emails and online activity. A few days later, my worst fears were confirmed. Sarah's car had been parked at an upscale hotel downtown several times during her so-called late nights at work. I sat at my desk, staring at the GPS data on my screen, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no way she was working there. I decided to follow her the next time she said she had to work late. That day came sooner than I expected. Sarah left the house, dressed impeccably, claiming she had a late meeting and might come home late. I told her to be safe, masking my growing anxiety with a forced smile. Once she was gone, I grabbed my jacket and keys and drove a few blocks behind her. I stayed far enough to not raise suspicion, but close enough to keep her in sight. My heart raced as she made her way to the hotel. She parked and walked inside, her steps confident and unhurried. I waited for a few minutes, then followed her in. The lobby was bustling with people, but I managed to spot her stepping into an elevator. I waited until the doors closed, then approached the front desk. I had to think fast. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist. "I'm supposed to meet my wife here, but I can't reach her on her phone. She just went up to her room. Can you tell me which floor she's on?" The receptionist eyed me warily, but eventually nodded. "What's the last name?" "Williams," I replied, giving her my last name. After a moment, she told me Sarah had checked into room 1015. I thanked her and made my way to the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the 10th floor, I moved down the hallway, looking for room 1015. I stopped in front of the door, my hands shaking. I took a deep breath and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I pressed my ear against the door and heard muffled voices, followed by a burst of laughter. Rage and heartbreak surged through me. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. Without thinking, I banged on the door with my fist. "Sarah, it's Mike. Open the door." There was a brief silence, then hurried whispers. The door opened a crack, and Sarah's face appeared, her eyes wide with shock. She was wearing nothing but a silk robe, and her hair was tousled. Behind her, a man was scrambling to put on his clothes. "Mike, what the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, trying to block my view. "What am I doing here? What the fuck are you doing here, Sarah?" I pushed the door open, forcing her to step back. The man, a tall, muscular guy with dark hair, stood there, looking guilty and terrified. He was still buttoning up his shirt. I turned to Sarah, my anger boiling over. "This is what you've been doing? This is your late night at work? Fucking some guy in a hotel room?" Sarah's face turned red, but she didn't deny it. "Mike, please. It's not what you think." "Not what I think? Do you think I'm an idiot?" "I followed you here, Sarah. I know everything." The man tried to speak, but I cut him off. "Get the fuck out of here before I do something we'll both regret." He grabbed his things and bolted out of the room without another word. I turned back to Sarah, who was now crying, her face a mix of fear and shame. "Why, Sarah? Why would you do this to us?" My voice broke as the reality of the betrayal hit me. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know, Mike. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Never wanted to hurt me? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around and fucking this guy behind my back. How could you?" She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there, my fists clenched, trying to process the situation. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had shattered our life into a million pieces. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. The drive home from the hotel was a blur of anger and sorrow. Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat, tears streaming down her face, occasionally glancing at me with a mixture of fear and regret. I didn't speak, my mind consumed by thoughts of betrayal and how everything had fallen apart so suddenly. When we pulled into our driveway, I finally broke the silence. "Get your things," I said coldly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You're not staying here tonight." "Mike, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Can we just talk about this?" "Talk? You want to talk after what I just saw?" "There's nothing to talk about, Sarah. You lied, you cheated, and you broke my heart. Get out." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes, but I couldn't muster any sympathy. I walked into the house, leaving her to follow. Inside, I headed straight for the bedroom and grabbed a suitcase from the closet. I threw it onto the bed and began tossing her clothes into it. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching me with tear-filled eyes. "Mike, please. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. We can fix this." I stopped, turning to face her, my anger bubbling to the surface. "A mistake? Sleeping with another man isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a choice. And you made that choice over and over again. How many times did you meet him at that hotel? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her lip quivering. "A few months," she admitted softly. "But it didn't mean anything. It was just sex, Mike. I never stopped loving you." "Just sex?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? You've destroyed everything we had, and for what? Some meaningless fling? You need to leave." She approached me, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Mike, please. Let's go to counseling. We can work through this. I know I messed up, but I love you. Don't throw us away." "Don't throw us away!" I laughed bitterly. "You're the one who threw us away, Sarah. You chose him over me. Over us. There's no coming back from this. Now pack your things and get out." She broke down, sobbing as she reluctantly started packing her clothes. I stood there watching her, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction at her pain. It was a small comfort in the face of my own devastation. When she finished, I handed her the suitcase and opened the front door. She paused, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. "Not my problem," I replied coldly. "Maybe you can stay with your lover. I'm sure he'd be happy to take you in." She flinched at my words, then walked out the door, her shoulders hunched in defeat. I slammed the door behind her and locked it, leaning against it as the reality of the situation hit me. My marriage was over. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. I wandered through the house, feeling like a ghost in my own life. The memories of happier times haunted me, mocking the emptiness I felt inside. I ended up in the living room, collapsing onto the couch and staring blankly at the walls. Max, sensing my distress, came over and rested his head on my lap. I absent-mindedly petted him, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge and retribution. How could she do this to me? To us? The anger inside me was a burning furnace, and I knew I couldn't let it go unpunished. Sarah needed to face the consequences of her actions, and I was determined to make sure she did. But first, I needed to gather my strength and figure out my next move. The night was long and sleepless, filled with visions of Sarah and her lover. I vowed that by the time this was over, she'd regret ever crossing me. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. I took some time off work, telling my boss I was dealing with a personal crisis. He was understanding, though I could sense his curiosity. Sarah, now staying at a friend's house, kept calling and texting, begging for a chance to explain and fix things. I ignored her. Every message was a painful reminder of her betrayal. As the initial shock wore off, a plan began to form in my mind. I was determined to make her pay for what she did. The idea of revenge consumed me, providing a twisted sense of purpose amidst the chaos. I started by gathering evidence. I retrieved the GPS data, the keylogger logs, and took screenshots of any incriminating emails and messages I found. Sarah had been careless, leaving a digital trail that painted a clear picture of her infidelity. I even found photos of her with the guy, a douchebag named Brad, who worked in sales at her company. The sight of them together made my blood boil. With everything I needed, I set my plan into motion. First, I called her company's HR department anonymously, posing as a concerned coworker. I told them about Sarah and Brad's inappropriate relationship, emphasizing how it was affecting the workplace environment. They assured me they would investigate the matter. Knowing Sarah's career was on the line gave me a grim satisfaction. Next, I reached out to Brad's wife, Jessica. I found her on social media and sent her a message, attaching some of the evidence I had gathered. It was a difficult message to write, knowing it would shatter her world as mine had been. But she deserved to know the truth. Within hours, she responded, her messages filled with shock and gratitude. We agreed to meet for coffee to discuss our next steps. When we met, Jessica was a wreck. She was a petite brunette with kind eyes that were now red from crying. We shared our stories, our pain, and our anger. There was an unspoken bond between us, two people betrayed by those they loved. Together, we devised a plan to confront them publicly. A week later, Sarah's company held a big corporate event, a gala to celebrate their latest achievements. It was a perfect setting. With Jessica's help, I managed to secure an invite. I dressed in my best suit, the bitterness and anger boiling just beneath the surface, ready to be unleashed. When I arrived at the gala, I spotted Sarah almost immediately. She was dressed to the nines, laughing and chatting with her colleagues, the picture of a successful businesswoman. Brad was there too, hovering around her like a vulture. I kept my distance, waiting for the right moment. As the night progressed, I saw my opportunity. The CEO of the company took the stage to give a speech, praising the team for their hard work. The room was silent, all eyes on him. That's when I made my move. I walked up to the stage, ignoring the curious glances from the attendees. I tapped the CEO on the shoulder, interrupting him mid-sentence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying through the microphone. "I have something important to share." The CEO looked taken aback, but he stepped aside. I turned to face the audience, my heart pounding. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you all need to know. My name is Mike, and I'm here to expose the truth about Sarah and Brad." Gasps filled the room as I began to reveal their affair. I pulled out my phone, displaying the photos, messages, and emails for everyone to see. For months, these two have been sneaking around, betraying their spouses, and disrespecting this company. Sarah's face turned pale, and she rushed toward me, her eyes wide with panic. "Mike, stop. This isn't the place." "Isn't the place?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on me." Brad stood frozen, unable to move. Jessica, who had been waiting in the wings, stepped forward. "And Brad, how could you do this to me? To our family?" The room was in chaos. Colleagues whispered. Some looked away in discomfort, while others watched with morbid curiosity. The CEO tried to regain control, but the damage was done. Sarah and Brad's reputations were in tatters. As I left the stage, Sarah ran after me, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, please, I'm so sorry. You have to believe me." "Believe you? After everything? I don't think so," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. You're going to regret every lie, every deceitful act." I walked out of the gala, leaving her sobbing in the hallway. The satisfaction of my revenge was bittersweet. It didn't heal the wound, but it gave me a sense of closure, a way to reclaim some of the power I had lost. The next steps would be even harder, but I was ready to face them head on. The fallout from the gala was immediate and brutal. Sarah was suspended from work pending an investigation, and Brad was let go on the spot. Jessica filed for divorce the very next day, her anger fueling a swift legal process. Meanwhile, I tried to find some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. The satisfaction of revenge had given way to a hollow emptiness, and I knew I needed to close this chapter of my life for good. Sarah continued to reach out, pleading for a chance to explain, to make things right. I ignored her calls and messages until one evening when I finally decided it was time to face her. She deserved to know my decision, and I needed the closure to move on. I asked her to come by the house for one last conversation. She arrived looking disheveled and exhausted, a stark contrast to the confident, put-together woman she used to be. She stood at the doorway, her eyes pleading for understanding, but I remained stoic. "Come in," I said flatly, stepping aside to let her enter. She hesitated before walking inside, her eyes darting around the familiar surroundings, as if seeking solace in the memories of our life together. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. Max lay by my feet, sensing the tension. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Mike, I know I've said it 100 times, but I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you like this." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "Sarah, sorry doesn't cut it. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we built together. You lied, you cheated, and you humiliated me in front of everyone." Tears welled up in her eyes. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand why it happened." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Why? Because you were bored? Because I wasn't enough for you?" "No, it's not that," she insisted. "It was never about you not being enough. I was lost, Mike. I felt like I was drowning in my own life, and I didn't know how to reach out to you. Brad was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. but I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, the anger I had kept bottled up starting to surface again. You never stopped loving me? Do you even hear yourself? You don't cheat on someone you love. You don't lie to their face for months and then claim it didn't mean anything. You had a choice, Sarah, and you chose to betray me. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I know I did. I know I fucked up. But please, Mike, I'm begging you. Give me another chance. Let's go to counseling. Let's try to rebuild what we had. I'll do anything. I felt a pang of sadness watching her crumble, but I knew my decision was final. Sarah, there's nothing left to rebuild. The trust is gone, and without it, there's no foundation for us to stand on. I can't be with someone who could do what you did. It's over. Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking with grief. Please, Mike, don't do this. Don't throw us away. I love you. I need you. I stood up, unable to bear watching her suffer any longer. You should have thought about that before you made those choices, Sarah. I hope you find the help you need, but it won't be with me. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, and nodded slowly, accepting the reality of my words. I'm so sorry, she whispered one last time. I walked her to the door, every step feeling like a weight lifting off my shoulders. As she stepped outside, she turned to face me one last time. Goodbye, Mike. Goodbye, Sarah, I replied, closing the door behind her. The finality of it hit me hard, but I knew it was the right decision. I leaned against the door, taking a deep breath. It was over. The pain of her betrayal would linger, but at least now I could start to heal. I had faced her, told her my truth, and made my stand. It was time to move forward, to find a new path, and to rebuild my life without her. The decision to divorce Sarah was inevitable, and despite the emotional turmoil, I knew it was the only way forward. I hired a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, who came highly recommended by Tom. From our first meeting, I knew I was in good hands. Linda was sharp, strategic, and fiercely determined to get me the best outcome. Sarah, on the other hand, was blindsided by my resolve. Despite her initial pleas for reconciliation, she soon realized I was serious about ending our marriage. She hired her own lawyer, and the legal battle began. It was a messy, drawn-out process, as divorces often are, especially when emotions run high and both parties feel wronged. The first court hearing was a surreal experience. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. Sarah was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked worn out, a shadow of the vibrant woman I once knew. I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. All I felt was a cold detachment. The judge presiding over our case was a stern, middle-aged man with a reputation for being fair but firm. He listened patiently as our lawyers presented their arguments, laying out the evidence of Sarah's infidelity and the impact it had on our marriage. Linda had done her homework, presenting a compelling case that left little room for sympathy towards Sarah. Sarah's lawyer tried to paint a different picture, emphasizing her remorse and her desire to repair the damage she had caused. They argued that despite her mistakes, she deserved a fair settlement, and that the court should consider her emotional state during the affair. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, feeling the weight of the past months bearing down on me. Your Honor, I loved my wife deeply. I trusted her with my heart and my life. Her betrayal has caused me immense pain and suffering. I am not seeking revenge through this divorce. I am seeking justice and closure. I want to move forward with my life, free from the shadows of her infidelity. The judge nodded, taking in my words. He then turned to Sarah. Mrs. Williams, do you have anything to say? Sarah stood, her voice trembling. Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake. I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused Mike. I never meant for things to end up like this. I ask for leniency, not just for myself, but so that we can both move on and heal. After several weeks of hearings and negotiations, the judge finally made his decision. Given the evidence of infidelity and the emotional harm it had caused, he ruled in my favor. Sarah was awarded a modest settlement, but the bulk of our assets, including the house, were granted to me. It was a bittersweet victory, a validation of my pain, but it did little to soothe the scars left behind. The finality of the divorce decree brought a sense of closure, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sarah moved out of our home, and the silence that followed was both a relief and a reminder of what had been lost. I spent weeks decluttering the house, removing traces of our life together, and making it my own again. One evening, as I sat in the living room with Max, I received an unexpected text from Jessica. She had finalized her divorce from Brad and was moving back to her hometown. She thanked me for helping her uncover the truth and wished me well in my journey ahead. Her message brought a small, albeit fleeting, sense of camaraderie and closure. Despite the legal victory, the emotional healing would take much longer. I knew that the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The trial was over, the judgment passed, and it was now up to me to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal. With a deep breath, I resolved to move forward, leaving the past behind and embracing whatever the future held. The divorce had ended one chapter of my life, but it also opened the door to new possibilities and the promise of a fresh start. In the months following the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house, once filled with memories of Sarah, slowly transformed into a space that felt uniquely mine. I redecorated, changed the furniture, and created new routines. Max was my constant companion, his presence a comforting reminder that life goes on, even after the most painful betrayals. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and responsibilities. The distraction helped, but the nights were still lonely. I joined a local gym, started cooking new recipes, and even took up painting, anything to keep my mind occupied. Despite these efforts, the emptiness lingered. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from Jessica. She had moved back to her hometown, but was visiting Austin for a few days and wanted to meet up. We had stayed in touch sporadically, offering each other support during our respective divorces. Seeing her again seemed like a good idea, a way to close the loop on that painful chapter. We agreed to meet at a cozy little coffee shop downtown. When she walked in, I was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the weary, broken woman I had met months ago. She seemed more at peace, her smile genuine and warm. We hugged, and it felt like reconnecting with an old friend. "Mike, it's so good to see you," she said, her eyes bright. "You too, Jessica. How have you been?" "Better," she admitted. The move was tough, but it was the right decision. Being away from Brad and all the memories has helped a lot. We spent the next few hours talking, catching up on each other's lives. It was comforting, sharing stories with someone who understood my pain. As the afternoon turned into evening, we decided to grab dinner at a nearby restaurant. Over wine and pasta, our conversation took a more personal turn. We talked about our fears, our hopes, and the possibility of starting over. There was a palpable chemistry between us, something that had been missing from my life for so long. When dinner ended, neither of us was ready to say goodbye. "Do you want to come back to my place for a nightcap?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jessica hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that." We walked back to my house, the evening air filled with a sense of anticipation. Inside, I poured us both a glass of wine, and we settled on the couch, talking and laughing. The atmosphere was relaxed, the conversation flowing effortlessly. At one point, our eyes met, and the room grew quiet. There was an undeniable tension, a magnetic pull that drew us closer. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. She responded immediately, her lips soft and inviting. The kiss deepened, and all the pent-up emotions of the past months surged to the surface. We moved to the bedroom, our clothes discarded in a trail behind us. It wasn't just about sex, it was about connection, healing, and finding solace in each other. The intimacy we shared that night was intense and passionate, a cathartic release of all the pain and loneliness. In the aftermath, as we lay tangled in the sheets, Jessica rested her head on my chest, her fingers tracing patterns on my skin. "Mike, I didn't expect this, but I'm glad it happened," she whispered. "Me too," I replied, holding her close. "I think we both needed this." We spent the night together, wrapped in each other's arms, finding comfort and warmth that had been missing from our lives. The morning brought a new sense of clarity. We both knew we weren't looking for anything serious, but the connection we had was real and meaningful. Over the next few days, we spent as much time together as we could, knowing her visit was temporary. We explored the city, shared meals, and talked about our plans for the future. When it was time for her to leave, we parted with a promise to stay in touch and see where life would take us. Jessica's visit was a turning point for me. It reminded me that there was life beyond betrayal, that new connections and experiences could bring healing. It wasn't about replacing Sarah or erasing the past. It was about moving forward and allowing myself to feel again. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to focus on myself, my work, and my newfound hobbies. Jessica and I stayed in touch, our occasional messages and calls a comforting reminder of that special bond. I knew I was on the path to healing, and while the scars of the past would always be there, they no longer defined me. I had learned that life is unpredictable, filled with unexpected twists and turns. But it's also resilient, capable of mending even the deepest wounds. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in a long time.